In this video, I will show you how to register and authenticate users using PHP and MySQL. So we can click on Register, and here we have the Register form. Let's click on Register, and here we have the validation errors. Now let's fill the form, then Register. So the account has been created successfully and we are redirected to the index page. Also, we have this drop-down list. So we can click on Logout, then Login. Let's fill the form, then Login. And now we are authenticated successfully. So we can see the user profile, and we obtain this page. So this page is available only to authenticated users. So let's copy the URL, and let's log out. Let's paste the URL just here, and let's press Enter. And we are redirected to the login page. Now let's create a new table in the database to store the different users. So here I will use XAMPP, and you can connect to MySQL database using phpMyAdmin. So we can click on Admin. Then let's create a new database. Let's call it BestStoreDB. Then create. Then let's create a new table in this database. So we can use an SQL query. So let's click on SQL. Then we can use this SQL query to create a new table called users. So here we have the ID, which is the primary key, and it is auto-incremental. We have the first name, we have the last name, the email address, which is unique. We have the phone number, the address, the password. We can also add the role to implement the role-based authorization, and by default the user role will be client. Then we have the date of creating the user account. Now let's execute this query, so we can click on this button. And now the table is created successfully. We can take a look at it. So for the moment it is empty. So in this video I will use vscode to write the application. And the easiest way to run the application is to install an extension called PHP Server. So we can click on this button. Then here let's write PHP Server. Let's select this extension. And we need to install it. So in my case, it is installed correctly. So to be able to use this extension, it is necessary to add PHP to the system environment variables. So let's go to the folder of PHP that is available with XAMPP. So we can click on Explorer. Then let's open the folder of PHP and let's copy the path. Then we need to add it to the system environment variables. So we can click on System, then Advanced System Settings, then Environment Variables. Then we need to add it to the path variable. So let's add it at the beginning. And let's add semicolon to separate the different values. Then OK, OK, OK again, and let's close this window. Then we need to restart vscode. Now let's create a new folder for our PHP application. I will create it on the desktop, and let's call it Best Store. Then let's create a new PHP file. We can call it index.php. Then let's use Bootstrap. So we can go to the documentation website of Bootstrap. Let's go to the first link, then Docs. And let's copy the source code that includes Bootstrap CSS and JavaScript from the CDN. Let's paste it here. Let's change the title of this page. So the title that we have here is the title of the window, so we can write Best Store. Then let's display the application icon. So I already prepared 2 images that I want to use in this application. So first let's create a new folder and let's call it Images. Then I will use these two images. So let's copy them. And let's paste them in the images folder of our application. Then let's display this image in the application. So we can add the link element, and this is the URL of the image. Now let's add the navbar. So in the documentation website of Bootstrap, under Components, we can click on navbar. Then let's copy this source code that allows us to obtain this navbar. Let's paste it in the body. Let's change the name of the application in the navbar. So here we can write best store. Let's update the URL. So here it will be /index.php, which is the current file. And also we can add an image. So we can display this image using this width and this height. Then we have this UL element that contains several items. We can keep the home item, but we can change the URL. So here we can write /index, which is the current page. Let's delete this attribute. And let's change this Bootstrap class. So we can use text dark. Let's delete this item. Then we need this item, but we will display it at the right. So later we need to move it. Then we can delete this item. Then here we have this form. We don't need it, so let's delete it. Then let's create a new UL element. So we can copy this one. And let's paste it here. Let's close the element. Then we can keep this class and let's delete the other classes. Then let's move the drop-down list into this UL element. Let's display the text of this element using the dark color. So just here we can add text dark. Let's change the text that we have here. So we can write admin. Then we can delete this item. We can rename this item. So here we can write profile. And the URL will be the URL of the profile page. So let's add / then profile.php. And this item we can call it logout. Let's change the href, so it will be /logout.php. Then after this UL element, we can create another UL element to display two buttons, the register button and the login button. So we can copy this UL element and let's paste it here. So this is the first item, and here we have the register button. And when we click on this button, we will go to /register.php. So later we need to create this file. And this is the second item. It contains the login button and it will take us to the page /login.php. So later we need to create this page. Let's save the file and let's run it using the extension PHP Server. So we can make a right click, then PHP Server Serve Project. And we obtain this page. So now we can add some space at the left and some space at the right. Also, if the user is authenticated, we can display this drop-down list. And if the user is not authenticated, then we can display these two buttons. So to add some space at the left and at the right, we can use the container class instead of container fluid. So just we can delete fluid hyphen. And to know if the user is authenticated or not, we will use sessions. So just at the beginning, we can start the session. So we can call session start, then we can create a variable which is a boolean, we can call it authenticated, and we can initialize it with the value false. Then, based on the value of authenticated, we will display either the drop-down list or the two buttons. So for the moment, authenticated will be false, and later when we implement the user registration and authentication, we will update its value based on the authentication states. Now let's update the navbar based on this variable. So if the user is authenticated, we will display this UL element that contains this drop-down list. Otherwise, we will display this UL element that contains the two buttons. So just here. So if authenticated is true, then we will display this drop-down list. So the condition starts here, and we need to close it here. Then let's add else. So we open the brackets here, and we need to close it after the UL element. Let's save the file, and let's refresh the page. So because the value of authenticated is false, we have the two buttons. Let's change it to true. Let's save the file, and let's refresh the page. And now we have this drop-down list. Let's set it to false. Then let's create the hero section. So after the navbar, we have this h1 element. Let's delete it. So we can add this div that has this background color. We have this container that contains this row that contains two columns. This is the first column and this is the second one. So in the first column, we will display the title, Best Shop of Electronics, for example, and we can display this paragraph. Then in the second column, we will display the image that is available in the images folder. So this is the image that we already added here. Then after this hero section, we can display the footer of the application. So we have this footer that will use this background color. Then we have this container that contains only one row, and in this row we have only one column that will display its text in the center of the page. We can add this image, so this is the logo image that we have in the images folder. Then here we will display the copyright. Let's save the file, and let's refresh the page. And we obtain this page, so this is the hero section, and here we have the footer. So this navbar and this footer will be shared between all the pages of this application. So we can move them into different files. So let's create a new folder, and you can call it layout. Then let's add two PHP files. The header and the footer. Then let's move the first part of this file to the header, and the footer, let's move it to the footer file. So we can copy from the beginning till the navbar. Let's paste it here. Then let's move the footer till the end of the file. And let's put it here. Then let's include the header and the footer in the index.php file. So at the end we will include the footer. Then let's include the header. Let's save all the files. And let's refresh the page. So we obtain the same result. So when we click on the register button, we will go to the page register.php. So now we need to create this file. Then let's include the header and the footer. So this is the header and this is the footer. Then let's display the title of this page. So we can add this container that contains one row, and here we have one column. So it will be displayed in the center of the page. We can add a border and a shadow to this div. Then we can display the title of the page, which is register. Then we have this horizontal separator. Then we can create our form. So this form will be submitted using the post method. So we can add the method attribute, and it is equal to post. And because this form will be submitted to the same page, we don't need to add the action attribute. Then let's add the first field of this form. So we can add this row that contains one label with the text first name. So we can add this character to say that the first name is required. Then we have this input field that has the name first name. So this is the name of the field that will be submitted to the server. And initially the input field is empty. Then we can add this span to display any validation error. So for the moment the span is empty. So here we have another row that contains a label with the text last name. Then we have this input field that has the name last name and the initial value is empty. Also we have a span for the validation errors. Then we have another row for the email address and the input field is called email. Then here we have another row for the phone number and we have this input field that has the name phone. Then we have another row for the address. So the address is optional, and then we have this input field that has the name address. Then we have another row for the password. So the type here is password. Like this, the content of this input field will be hidden, and the name of this input field is password. So this is the name that will be submitted to the server. Then we have the last row that contains a label with the text confirm password. So the type of this input field is password and the name is confirm password. Then we can add this row that contains two columns. This is the first column that will be displayed after an offset. So in the first column we have the register button, which is the submit button that allows us to submit the form. Then we have this div, which is the second column. So it has a link, which is also a button, which is the cancel button. So it will take us to the index page. Let's save the file and let's refresh this page. So it is the register.php page. And we obtain this page. So here we can see that we have a border and a shadow. This is the title and this is the form. So to enhance this page a little bit, we can add a shadow and a border to the navbar. So let's go to the header. And here in the nav element, we can add border bottom and a shadow. Let's save the file and let's refresh the page. So now when we submit the form, we need to read the form data and we need to validate them. So we can create these variables, the first name, the last name, the email address, the phone number, and the address. And then if we received a request using the post method, then we will read the first name from the request. So first name that we have here is the name of the first input field. And last name is the name of the second input field. So we can read the submitted data and we can display them in the form. So let's display the submitted first name. So just here we can add the PHP tag and we can display the first name. So we can either use this syntax or we can use a shortcut. So we can delete echo and PHP and let's replace them with equal. We can also delete the semicolon. Let's copy this. In this input field, we will display the last name. Then here we will display the submitted email address. Then the phone number. Here we will display the address. Then we don't need to display the password and the confirm password for security purpose. Then let's create additional variables to display any validation error. So we can create these variables to display the validation error of every field, and you can create this boolean to know whether we have any validation error or not. Then let's display these variables into the span of the different input fields. So we have this first input field that will be used to display any validation error related to the first name. So just here we can add the PHP tag and you can display the error message related to the first name, which is first name error. Let's copy this. Let's do the same thing with the second span. So here we will display the validation error related to the last name. Then here we will display the validation error related to the email. This is the error related to the phone number. This is the error related to the address. This is the error related to the password, and this is the error related to the confirm password. Let's save the file. Let's fill the form. Then register. So here we can see that we did not lose these data, but we don't have the password and confirm password for security purpose. Now let's validate the submitted data and let's display the validation errors, if any. So first we will validate the first name. So if the first name is empty, then we can display the error message, first name is required. And we can set the error to true. So error that we have here is this boolean. Then we will validate the last name. So if we don't have the last name, then we can display this error message related to the last name. Then we will validate the email address. So if the email address does not have the email address format, then we can display email format is not valid and we can set error to true. Then we will validate the phone number. So the phone number should have a valid format. If it does not have a valid format, then we can display this error message. Then we will validate the password and the confirm password. Let's save the file. Let's click on register and let's submit the form. And here we have the validation errors. So because the address is optional, we don't have any validation error related to the address. Now let's fill the form. So here I will provide a confirm password that is not the same as the password. Let's submit the form. And now we can see that password and confirm password do not match. So let's provide the valid password and confirm password. Then register. And now we don't have any validation error. Now we need to connect to the database to check if the email address is already used or not and to create the user account. So we can create a new PHP file. So first let's create a new folder. We can call it tools, for example. Then let's create a new PHP file. And let's call it db.php. So we can create this function, get a database connection. Then here we will connect to MySQL. So using this constructor, we will connect to this server. This is the username. I don't have any password. And we will connect to this database. If we cannot create the connection, then we will stop the application. Otherwise, we will return this connection. Let's save the file. Then in register.php, we need first to check if the email address is used or not. So here, when we validate the email address, we need to connect to the database. So we need to include this file and we need to call this function. Then we can use this connection to connect to the database. Then we can create a statement, so we will execute this SQL query, select the ID of the user from the users table, which is the table that we have already created, where the email address of the user is equal to this parameter. So then we need to replace this parameter by the email address of the user, which is the submitted email address. So here we will replace the first parameter of this query with this email address. Then we will execute the statement. So here we have S because the email is of type string. Then we can store the result and we can check the number of users having this email address. If this number is greater than 0, this means that the email address is already used. Then we need to close the statement. Like this, we can use it later. So if we don't have any validation error, then we can create the user account. So first, we will encrypt the password. So we can use this method to encrypt the password. And if you don't like to encrypt the password, then you can just delete this statement. Then we can read the current date, and we will create a new statement. So we will execute this SQL query. So we will insert into the users table, we will insert the first name, last name, email, phone, address, password, and created at. Then here we have the values. So because we are using a prepared statement, for the values we have question marks, and we need to replace the different question marks by their values. So we can use bind param. So here we have a string that provides the type of the different parameters. So S means a string and I means integer. And because all the parameters that we have here are of type string, we can see that we have the letter S several times. So the first S to say that the first parameter is of type string, and the last S is to say that the last parameter is of type string. Then we need to replace the different parameters here by the values of these variables. Then we will execute the statement and we will read the ID of the created user. Then we will close the statement. Then we can store the data of the created account into the session and we can redirect the user to the index page. Then we can exit the execution of this file. Now to check if the user is authenticated or not, we can for example check if we have the email address into the session data or not. So let's save this file and let's update the header. So here after this statement we can check if the user is authenticated or not. So if we have the email in the session data, this means that the user is authenticated. In this case we can set authenticated to true. Let's save the file. Let's fill the form. Then register. So now we can see that the user is authenticated. That's why we have this drop-down list. Also, we can see the created user in the database. So let's click on admin. Then let's select our database. And let's select this table. And we have this user. So by default, the user role is client. So if the user is authenticated, he should not be able to access to the register page again. So let's delete index. And let's write register. But here we are always able to access to this page. So let's update register.php. And at the beginning, let's check if the user is authenticated or not. So if we have the email address in the session data, this means that the user is authenticated. In this case, we can redirect him to the index page. Let's save the file. And let's refresh this page. So we can see that because the user is authenticated, we are redirected to index.php. Now I will show you how to log out the user. So here when we click on logout, we will send a request to logout.php. So now we need to create this file. So in this file, we will remove the session data and we will destroy the session. Then we will redirect the user to the index page. Let's save the file. So for the moment that the user is authenticated, let's click on logout. And now we have these two buttons, which means that the user is logged out correctly. Now if we click on register, we are able to access to this page. Now let's create the login page. So when we click on login, we will send a request to the file login.php. So now we need to create this file. First, let's include the header and the footer. And if the user is authenticated, we can redirect him to the index page. Then let's add the title of this page. So we can create this container that contains one div that will be displayed in the center of the page, and it will have a width of 400 pixels. Then we can display the title login, and we will display it in the center of the page. We can add this horizontal separator. Then let's create the form. So this form will be submitted using the post method. Then let's add two fields into this form, the email address and the password. So this is the first input field. It has the name email, and this is the second one, and it has the name password. So the type here is password. Then let's add two buttons. So we can add this row that contains two columns. In the first column, we have the first button, which is the login button, and it is the submit button that allows us to submit the form. Then in the second column, we have another button, which is the cancel button, that will take us to index.php. Let's save the file. Then let's click on login. And we obtain this form. So when we click on login, we need to read the submitted data. So we can create two variables, email to store the submitted email address and error to display any error message. Then if we received a request using the post method, we will read the email address and the password from the request. If the email is empty or the password is empty, we can display this error message, email and password are required. So now let's display the value of the email variable into the input field having the name email. So in this input field having the name email, we will display the initial value. Then above the form we can display the error message. Then inside the if condition we will display a bootstrap alert. So here we have this bootstrap alert of type danger that contains the error message. Let's save the file and let's submit the form. And we have this alert. So let's provide the email address. Let's provide the password. Then login. And now we don't have the alert anymore. So now we need to check if the submitted credentials are valid or not. So if the email address or the password is empty, we can display this error message. Otherwise, we need to connect to the database to check if the provided credentials are valid or not. So first we need to include db.php, then we can call get database connection, then we can create a new statement using prepare, then here we will execute this query. So we will read the data from the users table where the email address is equal to the submitted email address. Then we need to replace question mark that we have here with the submitted email address. So the email address is of type string, that's why we have this S. Then we need to execute the statement. Then we need to read the result. So we will read the ID, the first name, last name, phone, stored password, and created at. So the data that we are reading here are the data of the SQL query. Then we will check if we have at least one result. So if we have a result, then we will check if the password is correct or not. So this is the submitted password and it is not encrypted, and this is the stored password and it is encrypted. That's why we need to use this function. So if password verify is true, this means that the password is correct. In this case, we can store the user data into the session and we can redirect the user to the index page. Also, we can call exit to stop the execution of this file. Otherwise, we need to close the statement and we can display an error message. So here we can display email or password invalid. Let's save the file. Let's provide a wrong password. Then login. And this time we have email or password invalid, which is this error message. Now let's provide the correct password, then login. So this time we are authenticated correctly and we are redirected to the index page. Now let's create the profile page. So let's create the file profile.php. First, we need to include the header and the footer. Then let's display the title of this page. So we can create this container that contains one row with one column that will be displayed in the center of the page, and we can display the text profile. Then we can display the user profile. So we can add this row that contains two columns. In the first column we can display the text first name, then in the second column we can display the value of first name that is available in the session data. Then we can display the last name, so it is also available in the session data. Then we have the email address, the phone number, the address, and the registered at date, so it is created at in session data. Let's save the file and let's refresh the page. So here we can see that we have the correct user profile, but we have this error, so we don't have the address in the session data. Let's fix this. So here we can see that after the user login, we did not add the address. So we can copy this. Here let's write address. Then let's create this variable. So we can copy it. Let's add it to the SQL query. And let's read it. Let's save the file. So let's log out. Let's log in again. Then profile. So this time we can see that we have the address.